Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going behind the scenes to take a look at academic research.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, specifically how researchers are studying the connection between physical education and well-being in schools around the world.
Well-being, you say?
Well-being and PE.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and we have a very unique source for this deep dive.
Ooh.
A whole chapter from a research methodology book.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's kind of like a cookbook, but for researchers, right?
Exactly. Instead of recipes, it's different ways to design studies and analyze findings.
So we get to see how the sausage is made.
Yes.
Yeah.
Get to peek into the minds of the researchers.
Yeah.
And see how they approach these big questions.
That's crucial. Understanding the methods is key to evaluating any study's results, really.
I'm really curious about this research cookbook approach. What surprised you the most about this chapter?
Honestly, it was just the global scope of this research was just so impressive.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking studies from Oceania and America to Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East.
Wow, so this is something that's really being taken seriously worldwide.
It really is. It highlights how important this connection is between PE and well-being.
That's really striking. I imagine those studies must uncover some really different approaches and perspectives, right?
Yeah.
I mean, given the range of cultures and educational systems involved.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating. You can start to compare and contrast how different countries approach physical education and see what lessons can be learned from each other.
Yeah, very cool. I noticed that the chapter highlights qualitative research methods,
Right?
which is a bit different from the number crunching approach we often think about with research. Can you tell me a little more about what that means in this context?
Yeah. Qualitative research is all about understanding experiences and perspectives, not just measuring things. So instead of looking at test scores or attendance records, researchers might conduct in-depth interviews with students and teachers, observe classroom dynamics, or analyze policy documents.
So it's about getting a richer, more nuanced picture of what's happening.
Exactly. And that's especially important when you're dealing with something as complex as well-being.
Right, because you can't really capture that with numbers alone.
Exactly.
Now, the chapter mentions this idea of maximum variation representation in selecting study participants.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's a fancy way of saying that researchers try to include a diverse range of voices in their studies.
Okay.
For example, if they're interviewing students about their experiences in PE class, they won't just talk to the star athletes.
Makes sense.
They'll also seek out students who might be less enthusiastic about PE or who come from different backgrounds and have different abilities.
So it's about making sure the research really reflects the real-world diversity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that makes the findings much more robust and applicable to a wider range of situations.
Okay, so we've got this global collection of research using these qualitative methods.
Right.
Can we get into some specific examples?
Absolutely. One study that jumped out at me focused on how a new physical education curriculum was being implemented in Australian primary schools. And they specifically looked at schools of different sizes to see how that impacted the process.
Interesting. So like small schools versus large schools?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. The researchers found that teachers in smaller schools often felt less supported during the implementation process,
Makes sense.
which led them to only partially implement the new curriculum. And the study also revealed that providing teachers with regular mentoring and collaborative opportunities had a huge impact on their confidence and success in implementing the new curriculum.
So it wasn't just about the curriculum itself, but having those support systems in place.
Exactly. That's a crucial takeaway for anyone involved in educational reform.
For sure.
Hmm.
Okay, what else did this research cookbook have in store?
Well, another study that caught my attention involved surveying physical education teachers in the USA
Okay.
about their understanding of various terms related to the field like health, wellness, and physical activity.
You think they would have that down by now, right?
You'd think so, but it turned out there was a lot more ambiguity than you might expect. The researchers found that many teachers were using these terms interchangeably, even though they have very distinct meanings.
Ah, I see.
And this lack of shared understanding led to all sorts of confusion and inconsistencies in how these concepts were being taught in schools.
Wow. I hadn't even considered that.
Right. It makes you realize how crucial clear communication is, even within a specialized field like PE.
Yeah, right.
And that study really highlights the need for more standardized terminology and professional development to make sure everyone is on the same page.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how this behind-the-scenes look at the methodology can really give us such a deeper understanding of the challenges involved in this kind of research.
It really is. And we've only just scratched the surface. There are so many other fascinating studies to explore in this chapter.
I can't wait to dive in. We'll be back after a quick break to discuss even more intriguing research from around the world. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're continuing our exploration of how researchers around the world are studying that connection between physical education and well-being in schools.
Right, and we're looking at that research cookbook they use.
Exactly. Before the break, we were talking about how important it is for researchers to have a clear definition of terms like health and physical activity.
Yeah, to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Right. Are there any other studies that highlighted this need for a shared understanding?
Yes, actually. One study looked at an award-winning teacher training program in the UK
Okay,
that specializes in primary school physical education.
gotcha. So this is about how we prepare teachers to be effective.
Exactly. And what the researchers found was fascinating. They found that the program wasn't just about teaching theory, but it had a strong emphasis on practical experience.
Oh, so hands-on learning.
Exactly,
Yeah,
like an apprenticeship model. And the program also emphasized building strong relationships with students and creating a positive and supportive learning environment.
that's great. So the graduates from this program felt more confident in their abilities to teach PE.
They did,
Yeah.
which ultimately translates to better experiences for the students.
Right. When teachers are confident, everyone benefits.
Absolutely. But here's where that need for shared understanding comes in again.
Okay.
This study also revealed that even within this highly successful program, there were different interpretations of what quality physical education actually looked like in practice.
Oh, interesting. So even with the same training, everyone has slightly different ideas.
That's right. Some teachers emphasized skill development, while others focused on enjoyment and participation.
So there's still room for that individual interpretation.
There is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as everyone understands and respects those different perspectives.
True, true. I want to go back to the global aspect of this research for a second. You mentioned studies from the Middle East earlier. What can you tell us about those?
Well, one interesting study focused on the experiences of secondary trained PE teachers in Qatar who were assigned to teach younger students.
Whoa, that's a big adjustment going from teenagers to elementary school.
Exactly. And the study found that those teachers faced a number of challenges, adapting their teaching styles to meet the needs of younger learners and adjusting to a different cultural context.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But this study did highlight the importance of mentorship programs and professional development tailored to this specific situation.
So those teachers who had access to support felt more successful.
They did, much more.
Interesting. It seems like support and professional development are key themes that keep popping up in this research.
They do. Another study that highlighted this was a large-scale survey of Australian primary school principals.
Okay, so now we're getting the perspective of the administrators.
Exactly. And the principals were very clear about what they needed to make quality health and physical education a reality in their schools.
What were some of those things?
Well, having a dedicated physical education specialist on staff was a big one.
Right? Someone with expertise to lead the way.
Exactly. But they were also realistic about the challenges.
What do you mean?
Well, finding qualified PE teachers can be difficult, especially in smaller or more rural schools.
Right.
So they also emphasize the need for effective professional development programs to support existing teachers.
Makes sense. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach.
Exactly. The principals also stress the need for adequate time allocation for physical education.
For sure. It can't just be squeezed in as an afterthought.
It can't. And of course, funding was also a major concern.
Right.
They recognize that quality physical education requires investment in equipment, facilities, and professional development.
That makes sense. It's a lot more than just good intentions.
It really is. And that's a powerful takeaway from this research chapter.
It sounds like it.
It's not just about studying what works, but understanding the complex factors that influence implementation and success.
Yeah. And it sounds like that understanding requires looking at the issue from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. Teachers, students, administrators, policymakers.
For sure. We've talked a lot about these specific studies, but I'm curious how researchers actually analyze all this qualitative data.
Oh, good question.
We hear a lot about data analysis with numbers, but how does that work with things like interviews and observations?
Well, the chapter focuses on narrative or descriptive analysis.
Okay.
It's basically a way of finding meaning and patterns in words rather than numbers.
So instead of calculating statistics, researchers are looking for themes and stories that emerge from the data.
Exactly. One technique they use is called coding.
Coding.
Yes. So imagine you have a stack of interview transcripts. Researchers will go through them line by line and assign codes to different segments of text that represent specific ideas or themes.
Okay, so it's a way of organizing the information.
Precisely. And by analyzing those codes and the connections between them, researchers can start to identify key takeaways.
That makes sense. But with qualitative data, isn't there risk that the researchers might misinterpret things or let their own biases creep in?
That's a valid concern, and it's why good qualitative research involves a process called member checking.
Right. I remember that term from earlier. Can you remind me what that is?
Essentially, it means going back to the participants after the initial analysis and sharing the findings with them.
Yeah.
Researchers will ask, does this resonate with your experience? Or, have we understood you correctly?
So it's a way of making sure they got it right.
Exactly. And it often leads to even richer insights because participants might clarify their earlier statements or offer new perspectives that the researchers hadn't even considered.
So it's a two-way street.
Yes. And this emphasis on rigor and reflexivity is what makes qualitative research so valuable.
It gives us a deeper understanding.
It does, in a way that numbers just can't capture.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the research process.
It has.
But I'm also wondering, what does all this mean for those of us working in schools or involved in education policy?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back to discuss how to bridge the gap between research and practice and how to ensure that these findings are actually used to create a brighter future for students everywhere. Welcome back to the deep dive. We spent this whole episode, looking behind the curtain at how researchers are studying this connection between physical education and well-being in schools.
We've seen the global scope, the different methods, and how they analyze all that data.
Right. And now I'm wondering how we move from research to reality. How do we take all these fascinating findings and actually use them to make a difference in schools?
That's the key question, right? It's not enough to just have knowledge. We need to actually apply it. It's like the research provides us with a roadmap, but it's up to us to actually take the journey.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So where do we start? Who needs to be involved in this journey?
Well, it takes a village. We need researchers, teachers, administrators, policymakers, all working together.
So breaking down those silos between research and practice?
Exactly. One crucial step is definitely improving communication. Researchers need to be able to share their findings in a way that's clear and concise and accessible to those who are actually working in schools.
No more jargon.
Right. It needs to be practical and relevant to the everyday challenges that teachers and administrators face. And it goes both ways.
Oh, how so?
Well, teachers also need to be able to share their experiences and insights with researchers so that the research is grounded in the realities of the classroom.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's about creating a true partnership, not just researchers telling teachers what to do.
Exactly. Another key piece is professional development for teachers.
Okay.
And not just any professional development, but training that's deeply rooted in the latest research findings.
So not just telling teachers what to do, but giving them the tools and knowledge to make their own decisions based on the evidence.
Exactly. And it needs to be ongoing, not just a one-time workshop. Teachers need opportunities to reflect on their practice, to experiment with new approaches, and to learn from each other.
It's about empowering teachers.
It is. And of course, we can't forget about policymakers.
Right.
They need to create an environment that supports these research-based practices.
So things like adequate funding for PE, ensuring that teachers have the time and resources they need, and promoting a school culture that really values physical activity and well-being.
Exactly. It's about aligning policies with the latest research.
Makes sense. This is starting to feel like a pretty big and complex challenge.
Mm.
Where does the average person fit into all of this?
That's a great question, and it brings us back to the idea that it takes a village. Everyone has a role to play in creating this culture that values physical activity and well-being.
So what can parents, community members, or even just concerned citizens do?
There are so many ways to get involved. You can start by talking to your local schools about how they're incorporating these research findings. You can advocate for policies that support these initiatives, and you can encourage movement and play in your own families and communities.
So it's about creating this ripple effect where everyone is contributing to a healthier and happier future for kids.
Exactly. And remember, you don't need to be an expert to make a difference. Just sharing this knowledge with others, raising awareness, asking questions can have a huge impact.
That's great to hear. It makes me feel like we can all be part of this movement towards a more holistic approach to education, where well-being is valued alongside academic achievement.
I completely agree, and that's what makes this research so important. It's not just about gathering data, it's about using that data to create positive change.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It has been.
We've explored the global scope of research on physical education and well-being, delved into the methods and challenges, and even considered how to put these findings into action.
And hopefully we've inspired our listeners to think more critically about the role of physical activity in their own lives and in the lives of children.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.